From the Sunshine State, this is Tampa Bay's 10 Talk.
It's time for FLA Law, brought to you by the personal injury attorneys of Perenich, Caulfield, Avril Noyes. This hour will be informative, along with taking your questions and comments. Now, here are your hosts for today's show.
That's right. This is the host, Perenich, Caulfield, Avril Noyes of FLA Law, live on the radio, as you heard it. My name is Jacqueline Bryant, and I am here with my co-host, Lori Robinson, who you all know very well. And she and I are here to answer your questions live on the air, as we do every Tuesday at 5 p.m. As our intro stated, we are a live legal call-in talk show. So, of course, tonight we want everyone to call in with their legal questions. We are personal injury attorneys, as you may know. We are with the law firm of Perenich, Caulfield, Avril Noyes, which is one of the oldest injury law firms in the Tampa Bay area, which was founded in 1955. And so, of course, our expertise and area of law is the personal injury realm. So a lot of what you will hear us discussing on our show and of course tonight fall within the personal injury realm and umbrella. And of course, you have a wealth of knowledge between the hosts to be able to get your questions answered in that realm. Now, every now and then, there's people that do have questions for other legal matters that we, of course, can try to tackle or at least point you in the right direction, even if it's not personal injury law. But tonight, we're going to be talking about some personal injury related topics and also some safety when it comes to what is very poignant right now because it's a back to school era. School just started back in, I believe, Hillsborough, Pasco, and Pinellas yesterday. And so I feel like this is a good day or evening to discuss some of those topics when it comes to school buses and pedestrians and just giving some reminders and tips on the law in regards to that. And then, of course, Lori and I will also be talking about different things in regards to PIP insurances and insurances. I'm sure will come up, a little bit of workers' comp, and just some general auto questions as we go on throughout the night. But of course, I want you to be able to call in. So I'm going to give you all the information on how you can reach us tonight on the show. The phone number, of course, is the best way to call in. It's 727-441-3000. Again, if you'd like to call in and ask a question for Lori and I, the number is 727-441-3000. But we're also streaming. So if you're on Facebook and YouTube and you would like to have a legal question answered that way, you can drop a comment in the Facebook chat or on the YouTube chat. And we'll all answer those questions and read them out live over the air as well. So we would like anybody who has a legal question to either call in or leave us a comment chat. So if you don't know how to spell the firm name and you're looking for us on Facebook or YouTube, remember it's Caulfield, Avril and Noyes Injury Lawyers, and Perenich is spelled P-E-R-E-N-I-C-H. If you tap those two numbers if you tap that into your search bar, you should be able to find us. And especially on Facebook, there's like a red circle that'll show up letting you know that we are live. So if you find that page, then you found us, and you can see Lori and I on the video stream, and you can drop your questions in the chat. So hopefully you do that. Even if you don't have a question tonight, it'd be great if you could share this live stream with family, friends, or anybody else who you think may have questions. That way they'll see it and they'll be able to ask their questions as well. Right, Lori?
Sounds like a very good plan.
David, okay, perfect timing. As I was giving all that out, we got one coming in. Hi, David. How are you?
Hi, very good. Thank you.
What can we do for you tonight?
Hey, this isn't so much personal injury, but it is a health question. Our apartment was flooded in the most recent hurricane.
Yeah.
And our apartment, they have not really done any kind of water mitigation or flood mitigation.
Mm-hmm.
There was 5 inches of water. They're putting down new carpet, but they really haven't done anything about the potential mold situation. It seems they're doing things backwards, and I don't think it's going to be very healthy to move back in. I wasn't sure if there's a way that we could legally get out of the lease. We still have 6 months on the lease, but I'm not sure if that's even a thing.
Right. Well, I can give you a little bit of my commentary. Then, of course, if Lori has more to add, she can definitely chime in. As you said, obviously, this isn't a personal injury, but definitely the landlord-tenant subject matter that can be addressed by a landlord-tenant attorney. But there are ways that you can obviously look at your lease. And technically, under the law, the landlord has a legal obligation to make sure the place that you're living is inhabitable. And so, generally speaking, but of course, you want to speak to an attorney who specializes in this field. But if the inhabitants or the place where you're living becomes uninhabitable, and that could be for various reasons, one thing that I'm thinking of is obviously if the roof caves in or something happens where you can't live there anymore, then that obviously gives you the ability to not have to pay rent during that time when it's uninhabitable. So whether the mold issue or the possibility of a mold issue rises to that level is the question that you have. And it just depends on the severity of it. And at this stage, you may not quite know what you're dealing with. And there's different departments that you could probably reach out to maybe have a mold test conducted to see if it's toxic or if there's problems there. And if it does prove to be so, then that potentially could be grounds, at least give you a basis to go to a landlord-tenant attorney to discuss it. At the end of the day, it is a contract. So, you are obligated to meet your, responsibilities under that contract. You don't want to face any type of eviction. So my thoughts would be to at least first find out what the condition is in the mold. And I can't think of the name right off the bat of the department but it's usually within the government agency.
Yeah, I do think there's, I had a friend some years ago have a situation with mold in an apartment complex that she lived in, and she had very sensitive health issues, and she ended up, I think it was the Department of Health.
That might be what it is.
And they did come out and inspect, and they found issues, and the place that she was living did ultimately have to address those. And her particular situation, she was in a type of housing that was somewhat subsidized. An older person had some disabilities. And so while they did actually respond, they didn't renew her lease after that. And it was like, it's like a whole long story. But through that process, I did become aware that would be an option. But like you're saying, at this point, you're just going to kind of have to see what they do in terms of the restoration and what the situation looks to be, and then carefully look at your lease because obviously there will be issues. You're close. You've got 6 months to go. You don't want to lose a security deposit or other things probably if or have a credit issue. So it would be the kind of thing I would recommend, just as you did, Jacqueline, to kind of see what develops here. If there seems to be some questions about what they've done, the Department of Health would be an option. And then ultimately, if you weren't feeling comfortable with it, it's something that you could consult an attorney that specifically deals with the landlord-tenant type situation and leases, and see if you couldn't get some help in being able to actually avoid completing the lease.
Right. And then if you do start to experience, any type of symptoms or respiratory issues, you should treat right away, because that's going to be important to be able to document that as well.
Sure.
And you got to look at your health, because I think you're not in the unit now, and that's so you don't want to subject yourself to an ongoing issue if there is one.
Right. Okay, well, thank you very much. I appreciate your advice.
Absolutely. I hope that helped. And of course, if there's anything that you need to follow up or you need a referral, you can always give us a call at the office. And I'm sure there's a wealth of attorneys that we could refer you to.
Will do.
Good luck to you.
Good luck.
Thank you.
No problem. So that frees up the lines. If you have any questions, again, personal injury or otherwise, feel free to give us a call. That's what we're here for. This is FLA Law Live on the radio, and the number is 727-441-3000. Before we got to chatting about that, I was, of course, talking about it's back to school season, right? Mm-hmm. So school just started back in Pinellas County for sure. I think also Hillsborough and Pasco, but I can say for sure in Pinellas because I have two little ones who are in Pinellas. And I thought about it this morning because, number one, I saw a social media post a while back about just kind of reminding people of the various times that you have to stop for a school bus and the different type of roadways and when it's required and when it's not. I said, oh, that might be a good reminder to bring up on the show. And then also I thought about it because my own child had been asking to ride the bus. And so we have agreed this year finally to let her ride the bus in the afternoons. And of course, as a concerned mom, I was thinking about all the different safety issues and things that can arise in those scenarios. Now, of course, we walk her home, and she's not going to be by herself leaving the bus stop. But there are some students who are either old enough or for whatever reason, they do, walk themselves home, or they walk directly from school. Maybe they live very close to their school. And so I found a couple things that I wanted to kind of address and read out to our listeners. But also, of course, if you think of anything that you want to add as we kind of go through this list of some safety tips, feel free to chime in, Lori.
Sure.
But this was something that I pulled an article about, obviously advising on when to stop and what the law is in the state of Florida in regards to school buses, because as you know, there are times when people don't acknowledge the stop arm when it comes out from the school bus. And unfortunately, it results in, tragedies involving accidents and children getting off the buses. So in order to avoid that, we, of course, want to emphasize that people, of course, remember these laws. Maybe you don't know the law or you've forgotten it. It's been a while since you took driver's ed or whatever.
And I think this actually, the one about the stop bar, it might be, relatively speaking, a little more recent. Yeah, because it is a little confusing. I found it a little confusing. I didn't realize until I listened to, I think it was Representative Hooper at some function 3-4 years ago. And he was very proud of being a sponsor for the bill that means you've got to stop.
Put this into law.
Yeah, and with it, you got to stop either way if you're behind the bus. I knew about that. But if you're on the opposite direction, it's not exactly opposite, even though obviously the little stop sign comes out.
Right. And I think it also depends on whether there's a raised or concrete median in between. And so there's a little bit of a nuance there in regards to that. So that's why I think it's a good idea, like you pointed out, to let people know, because I think that's the biggest place where it's misunderstood is when you're coming the opposite direction of the bus and you're not directly behind the bus. So it says in Florida, the law requires drivers to stop when approaching a school bus that is stopped with its red lights flashing and the stop arms are extended. All drivers moving in either direction on a two-way street must stop for a school bus displaying a stop signal and must remain stopped until the road is clear of children and the school bus stop arm is withdrawn. So you have to wait for both of those things to occur, that there's no kids in the street and also that the arm has now been retracted. Now, on a divided highway, so here's a little bit of the nuance. If it's a divided highway that has a paved median, all drivers that are moving in either direction must stop for the school bus displaying a stop signal and must remain stopped until the road is clear of children and the school bus arm is withdrawn. So apparently when it's a paved median in the center, you still have to stop either way. The only time traffic approaching an oncoming school bus does not need to stop is if there is a raised barrier, such as a concrete divider of at least 5 feet of unpaved space separating the lanes of traffic. So it has to be a pretty wide distance in between the opposite lanes of travel. It says at least 5 feet in a concrete barrier. So either or. So concrete barrier or at least 5 feet of paved highway. So I didn't necessarily realize that.
Right.
So that's the only time that you don't have to stop when you're going in the opposite direction. So this also says on a highway divided by a raised barrier or an unpaved median at least 5 feet wide, drivers moving in the opposite direction do not have to stop for the bus. Painted lines or pavement markers are not considered barriers. So that's
so
not enough.
I can't get out there and measure. Actually, on my way to the office, coming down Belcher Road, I go right by Oak Grove. And that's where basically my awareness was raised because I had the situation. The bus was, heading south right in front of the school, stopped. It's got that big stop sign thing out and got the school guards and stuff like that. And I think, I guess I'm supposed to stop.
Exactly. And I think a lot of people don't realize that. And it's a little bit tricky trying to figure out when you should and when you shouldn't. And then if you stop and you're not supposed to stop, what could happen to the cars behind you?
So always want to be, not a quick stop, being tuned in to go. Of course, obviously, I guess in the school areas, you would expect the speed will be lower, but it is something to really be tuned into.
Exactly right.
Because there will be many people that will not actually be aware of this. And like you say, I mean, if you were to come to a more abrupt stop and somebody doesn't really understand because they don't see an issue, because in my particular situation, if there are no kids anywhere near my lane, it's unless I happen to have been at that session where Hooper was talking about this, I don't think I would, or if in talking like we are right now.
Yeah, exactly. Which is why, as our listeners, you're getting, the best information here, because these are things that people may not commonly know or maybe even consider. But because it's that time of year, you just want to be very much aware because at the end of the day, those are precious cargo, and students, they're
absolutely
pretty vulnerable on the road. So we want to make sure we're looking out for them. The funny thing is, as I'm thinking about this, has nothing to do with reality, but there was a time when I took trial ed in law school. And my final trial, and for people that are listening, they're like, what is that? It's the course that you take to learn how to try cases in law school. And you do different modules. You learn how to do a cross-examination and an opening and closing. And at the very end, you do a full trial. And my fact pattern was about a young child who had gotten on a bus, and the school had been understaffed and didn't have enough bus drivers, and they were using maybe unqualified staff to drive the buses. On this particular day, they had a PE driver fill in for the bus driver, and the bus driver, the PE teacher didn't have an up-to-date route, and he accidentally took this young kid to the wrong route. That child then had to cross many lanes of traffic to get home because they had been put off on the wrong side of the road and ultimately got hit and killed.
Oh, gosh.
And so I had to try that case as the plaintiff's attorney, and we won.
Hey!
We won that mock trial. But I just thought about it as I was looking at this. I said, I remember having to try that case, and it was a real case. It had happened, not in Florida, though. It was based out of a case that occurred in Texas. But things like this do happen.
Sure. You can easily see how that could happen.
They can have tragic results at times. So with that being said, you need to know what your penalties are if you do not stop for the buses when the arm is retracted and there's children in sight. This is what could occur. Moving violations that are subject to citations. You could be required to complete a basic driver improvement course. You could also be subject to 4 points on your driver's license and a minimum fine of $265. If you pass on the side where the children are entering and exiting, you will receive a minimum fine of $465. Wow. Okay. So that's not a cheap ticket.
No.
And I understand it. It's very important that you don't do that, and you don't, you kind of avoid or not paying attention to what's going on. And I've even seen school bus drivers who will lay on the horn. If someone blows past that stop sign, they will lay on the horn. And I respect it because it's like these kids need to be safe, and you're not paying attention.
And they're young children. So,
exactly.
They're very likely to do something that you wouldn't necessarily expect.
Right. Look at some of the statistics that are in this article. It says 52% of school-age pedestrians are killed in school transportation-related crashes from the ages of 5 to 10 years old. 1.6 times, looks like there are 1.6 more times to have fatalities occurring among pedestrians than occupants of school buses and school transportation-related crashes. So these stats are pretty dire here. Let's see.
That's kind of telling you that's why I guess Representative Hooper was so proud of his effort, which at the time I actually, I wasn't that tuned into it. But reflecting on those kind of statistics, you can see that that's really the major risk
it is
for the children, and that it's unfortunately resulted in quite a few tragedies over the years.
Yeah, and the sad thing is that when these crashes occur, the buses are stopped. They usually always have their lights flashing, and the stop arm is extended, and these accidents still occur. And the only explanation for that is because people aren't stopping for those. So be mindful of that, folks. That's our kind of our safety PSA when it comes to the school bus and the arm of the stop sign when it's out. Just be aware you need to stop for that. And the only time you're not really required to is if there's a large, median of at least 5 feet or a raised concrete barrier. And then if you're traveling in the opposite direction, otherwise you have to stop. Before we move on, any other commentary on the buses?
No, but I do think it's very timely because,
Yes.
We've seen the school years rolling out and the kids are excited, pent up energy,
Absolutely.
et cetera. So it's good to be reminded.
Yeah. So with that being said, I think it's also good to remember the pedestrians because I know that kind of goes hand in hand because after the kids get off the bus, then they're usually walking for some distance to get home, or even the children that don't ride the bus, but they're walking directly from school. And I live close to two schools as well. And so I see it all the time. And so these are tips that I found from the Florida Department of Highway Safety and Motor Vehicles that really apply to all pedestrians. It's not just students, but of course, if you're in the car with your kids, have them listen up. If they're ones that are walking home from school or they're walking with their friends, I cannot tell you how many times I see kids and they have headphones on.
Looking down at their phones.
Looking down at their phone.
Yeah. As they
just
cross the street.
so unsafe.
Adults too, but kids at least have an excuse, basically, but bad idea.
And, I haven't seen it yet. Obviously, school just started, but I've seen it before many, many times living so close to two different schools. I live next to a high school and a middle school. I will see parents drop off their kids in the middle of the street.
Oh, my gosh.
And they're right in front of the school, but they'll let them get out of the car and run. And it's like, no, you don't do that.
I'm too much of a nervous Nelly for that.
Yeah, it's like, don't drop your kids off in the middle of the road and let them run up to the school. That is the worst thing you could ever do. People are just not alert and attentive enough.
And I think because our lifetime has been spent practicing in the area of personal injury.
Yes.
So we know how easy it is for an accident to occur. And most people proceed on the assumption they're thinking about everything else, and
especially that time of morning, they're running to work, they're dropping their kids off, they're thinking about what they have to do today when they get to the office. People are just distracted,
right?
And especially now, even more so with cell phones and all kinds of other devices. It's just not a good idea. And I've seen cases where, people are doing just that. I had a case like that years ago where a child was dropped off by a parent, not in the middle of the road, thankfully, but on the sidewalk. And as she was walking in to school, a car turned in front of her and hit her. And so, like I said, people are just distracted. They are in a hurry. They're trying to get to work and various different things. So it's just something to be mindful of.
I think so. And I think, you're sharing before we started this evening about, we do a program for the kind of a summer program for one of the local schools and talk a lot about safety tips. And what's really hitting me is I'm thinking I can visualize young children walking from Oak Grove on my way to my home, and I see them go right across the street, glued to their phones, glued to them.
Yes.
And we all understand how addicted the phone is. It is. And,
we get it.
And it's even more so, I'm sure, for a young child that has, never had another experience. But that is something I think parents should actually really work hard to
be aware
of that and get their kid not to do that. I mean, it's one thing when you're home, that's a whole nother set of issues, but when you're crossing the street, I mean, just totally oblivious to anything going on around them. Yeah.
So folks, tell your kids, listen, and also be a good example when you are out with them. Phones away, headphones away. It's just not a good safety thing. Okay. So I think we have a caller who I knew would be calling. He's been a guest on the show a couple of weeks back. So he came and obviously told our listeners all about himself. So I believe we have Cornelius C.C. Demps on the line, who is a candidate for judge. He's running for a Sixth Circuit position, and I think he's on the line. You there, C.C.?
Yes, hey, good afternoon, Jackie. How are you doing?
Good.
How's everybody doing today?
How are you?
I'm good. Just out here campaigning, hitting up the trail. I want to make sure I have a chance to call back in and have your listeners hear me one more time before the election comes on Tuesday.
Absolutely. How's it been going?
It's been going well. A lot of positive support, I would say. Thank you to the Clearwater, St. Pete, Wesley Chapel, Dade City, and Newport Richey communities, especially. You've been very supportive of the campaign so far. A couple of quick updates. So we are number one in donations right now on the campaign.
Oh, great.
About over $50,000 in donations for a total of about $76,000 raised. So thank you so much to all of our donors who have really just shown their confidence in me and in my candidacy. We also have won both of the straw polls for this election. There was the Tampa Bay Chamber Hobnob straw poll that I won that poll with 45% of the vote, and we actually just won the Amplify Clearwater straw poll that's done between the Clearwater Chamber and the Safety Harbor Chamber, and I won that one with 41% of the vote. So that's good to know.
Nice.
The people across the full political spectrum have looked into me, looked into the candidates, looked into my background, my training, my qualities, and my service to the community, and people are overwhelmingly showing their support for me. So we love the support, love winning these straw polls, but we need people to come out and vote. That's all that matters.
Absolutely. Could you remind our listeners again what seat you're running for, what that covers, what kind of judicial position it is?
Yeah, sure. So it's Group 14, and it's for the Sixth Circuit. So the Sixth Circuit encompasses all of Pinellas and Pasco County. So it's both counties put together, and it's the circuit court seat. So these are one of the most important seats that we have in our judicial system. These are your judges that decide whether or not people go to prison. They handle multi-million-dollar disputes. They resolve issues when spouses decide they don't want to be together anymore, and when property is being transferred amongst generations through wills or trusts of that nature. So these seats are very important. And as we said in the beginning of this campaign, you want people who have the training and have the experience and know what they're doing, because this position is not on-the-job training. You need to know what you're doing and understand the gravity of the situation you're dealing with people who come before you every day. And the people of the Sixth Circuit so far have heard us and looked into what I bring to the table, and we have a lot of support. But right now we need people to come out and vote. So the election day is next Tuesday. That's the Florida primary. The polls open at 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. But early voting is happening now.
Yeah, I was going to say, I just got a text saying that early voting is still going on. So do you know when that ends?
Yeah, so in Pasco County, early voting is going to end this Saturday at 6 o'clock. So in Pasco and Pinellas County, you can early vote at certain locations between 10 a.m. and 6. Early voting ends Saturday in Pasco, and it ends on Sunday in Pinellas County. In Pinellas County, there's only 3 locations where you can go to early vote. They are the Supervisor of Election offices in downtown St. Pete, in Largo, the main one, and the one in downtown Clearwater by the Pinellas County Courthouse.
Okay.
In Pasco County, there's 12 locations you can go to, and we recommend people just visit the Supervisor of Election website to get more information on where to go.
Absolutely. Well, voting is extremely important, and I'm excited for you and for the primaries next week. Is there any last words or things you'd like to share with our listeners, obviously leading up to this important day?
Yeah, I would say, again, to everybody out there, thank you for your support. Thank you for your phone calls. People submit questions on the website. We make sure we give you a call back. They send us messages on the Facebook page, and the team call people back. Reach out to us. Ask me any question that you want. Now, as a judicial candidate, I cannot answer everything, but I can answer some things too. I can tell you about my background, my training, my experience, my service to the community, and just tell people to get out and vote. And if they want more information, be sure to visit the website, www.demps4judge.com. You can find us on all social media platforms as well.
Okay, awesome. Well, I thank you, Cece. Again, that's Cornelius Demps, and he's running for a Sixth Circuit circuit judge position. And of course, voting is going to be. He told you obviously the early voting is still going on, but then the primaries is next Tuesday on the 20th. Thank you so much for calling in, Cece. Best of luck to you. And of course, I'll be maybe seeing you this weekend.
Absolutely. Thanks a lot. Thank you again for having me, and everybody remember to vote Democrats. Thank you.
Absolutely. You have a good night.
You too. Bye.
All right. So that was obviously a great call to just to discuss it. Obviously, that's a large part of our legal system, our judges.
Yeah, absolutely. Very
so
important.
The people that are in those seats are extremely important. And of course, it's a nonpartisan election. So it's up to you to kind of understand the background of the folks that are running, the experience that they have, the kinds of cases that they've worked on over the years. And I think it's important to, have people that have maybe been on both sides. They've done criminal, they've done personal injury, they've had experience in multiple different areas. That way, that the person that's presiding over your matter, has experience in that. And they've tried cases and they've, done all the things that you are now asking the judge to rule on or to make decisions about. So,
right, as he said, it's really not supposed to be on-the-job training.
Exactly right.
Now, I mean, there can be different areas of law that you may have some more familiarity than others, but for the
which I think is usually true.
Yeah, but it is helpful to have had enough background in enough areas that would bring you into court, so you do have an appreciation for what that job entails.
Right, exactly. So voting is important, so I appreciate him giving us a call and talking to our listeners again.
And great to be reminded that the election is coming up because, in these smaller primaries, many people don't, and I'm confessing myself
included,
that it just doesn't hit the radar necessarily, and yet these are actually very important races. I think they've got school board races and things like that that are also a part of the primary ballot, and so we really all, as good citizens, should try to do our homework. And it's pretty easy, at least, to get background information now with the internet.
For sure. Everyone has a website. Usually most candidates have their bios and different things. And as he mentioned, they answer questions, apparently. So if you have questions for the candidates, it sounds like you can ask those as well, so that you're well informed when you go to vote and mark your choices on the ballot. But with that being said, I think it's a great time for us to take a short commercial break. When we come back, we'll talk a little bit more about some of those pedestrian safety awareness tips, and then we'll get into some other personal injury related topics. So we will be back shortly, right after the commercial break.
This is the Tan Talk Radio Network.
In 1955, the law firm now known as Perenich, Caulfield, Avril Noyes made a decision. Instead of taking whatever cases came through their doors, they decided to focus specifically on personal injury. 64 years later, the law firm is one of Clearwater's longest-running personal injury firms. Available 24 hours a day with offices in Clearwater and throughout Tampa Bay, they're ready to put decades of experience to work for you if you or a loved one has been injured in a car accident or injured due to someone's negligence or recklessness. If you feel overwhelmed, uncertain, or unsure about your next steps after being involved in an accident or after a loved one sustained serious injuries due to someone else's negligence, call Perenich, Caulfield, Avril, and Noyes at 727-796-8282 or online at usalaw.com. That's 727-796-8282 or online at usalaw.com. Non-attorney spokesman.
This is the Tan Talk Radio Network.
This is FLA Law live on the radio. And of course, if you've been tuned in, we are the attorneys at Perenich, Caulfield, Avril Noyes. My name is Jacqueline Bryant, and I'm here with my colleague, board certified civil trial lawyer, Lori Robinson. we've just kind of been giving a little bit of tips and safety tips in regards to the back to school era with all the school buses and kids and pedestrians on the road. And then, of course, we answered a few questions here and there that have come in from our listeners. But before we took our last call, we were talking about pedestrian safety. And I did have a few tips that I wanted to give regards to the Florida Department of Highway Safety and Motor Vehicles and safety recommendations that parents, if you're in the car with your kids or you're getting ready to go home and have dinner with your children, these are good things to talk about with them so that they're aware, and also good reminders for ourselves as adults, because again, kids emulate what they see. And if we're not doing things correctly, then they won't. And if we're not really informed ourselves, then it's hard for them to also be informed. So there's a couple of tips that I have for walking, those that are walking, and then also the motorists to be aware of those that are walking around them. So first with the pedestrians, when you're walking, make sure you're walking on the sidewalk whenever they're available. If there isn't one available, you should walk facing traffic and as far from traffic as possible. So as much as you can get away from the traffic, that's better. Try not to be as close to the vehicles, and then walk the direction that the cars are coming, not in the opposite way, right? And you should always pay attention and be alert. So headphones are a big no-no, okay? Looking down, texting, as we talked about, especially when you're crossing the street. Oh my goodness, the amount of people that I've seen walking across the street with their head down, not a good idea. Even, especially if you're wearing hoodies too, because that can kind of obstruct your view. So these are things, I've got teenagers in my mind when I'm thinking, I'm visualizing a teenager walking across the street as I'm saying this. But of course, whenever possible, when you're crossing the street, use the crosswalk. The crosswalks are the intersections that are marked because that's where drivers are expecting to see pedestrians. Look, if you're not in the crosswalk and you're crossing in the middle of the road, a driver or a car may not realize that you're there. People are turning, they're doing various things. So it's best to stay in the crosswalk. Also, you want to have, be in well-lit areas, which is not really a big issue after school. School gets out in the middle of the day, so the lighting shouldn't be an issue there. But trying to get in between gaps in traffic.
Right.
Oof.
And it's so easy. We're all impatient, but it's very dangerous. That's one of those things where 9 times out of 10, you do it, no problem.
Yeah.
But that 10th time, somebody doesn't see you.
Yeah. And I've seen a case where it's a young lady and her child, they were leaving the daycare or something like that. And she was walking with her son. She's standing in the middle of the road. No crosswalk. It's not a place to cross the street, but she got halfway across and then stopped in the middle to wait for the other lanes to clear. And a car made a left turn and kind of clipped them there, and being out in the middle of that road. So, yes, it was a little bit away from the crosswalk, but that accident probably could have been avoided had she walked over to the crosswalk and crossed that way with her child, as opposed to standing right there in the middle of the roadway.
Right.
Yeah. So that was unfortunate. But these are the kinds of things I think you can avoid if you follow some of these tips. So here's another one for motorists. You should look out for pedestrians everywhere at all times, especially in hard to see conditions where there's rain or bad weather or something like that. Always be alert for pedestrians and slow down to a stop when turning or otherwise entering a crosswalk. So you should never pass vehicles that are stopped for the crosswalk. So if someone stops in front of you for a crosswalk, do not go around them because they're stopping for a reason, folks. And you might not be able to see that's why they're stopping. So it's never a good idea to go around someone that's at a crosswalk. Of course, yield to the pedestrians that are in the crosswalk. That should go without saying. But hey, I'm going to throw it out there anyway. And follow the speed limit, especially around people on the street. Follow slower speed limits in school zones and neighborhoods where children are present. Yield to the pedestrians in the crosswalk and stop well back from the crosswalk to give other vehicles an opportunity to see the crossing pedestrians so they can stop too. I think that's extremely important.
Yeah, and I want to follow up just on what you were saying about, really slowing when you're making a turn, because we tend, when we're driving, to be focused on basically what we perceive we need to do to move to the next place. But you really should be looking for the things that can go wrong.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and that is, we have
defensive driver.
Right.
As they say.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
That was something my father told me, when he was teaching me to drive so many years ago. I never really forgot that. And then having done the kind of law we do, of course, it's been reinforced. But I'm just thinking, like, we have a case in the office, and I won't give any more details other than this, that it happens coming up to big intersection, actually Almerton and Belcher, and the vehicle is coming up. Our client was actually on a motorized bicycle coming across Almerton.
Right.
Yeah. And did make a mistake in that the client was going against the little traffic control device and the little guy that says walk or not, and so he shouldn't have.
Yeah.
But he was very visible, very visible. And the vehicle that was making that turn just didn't see him, And had the vehicle slowed, looked, he would have to have been able to have seen him.
Right.
You just have to look for what could go wrong. Because that's, obviously nobody wants an accident.
Right.
And there's just so many ways, and particularly with pedestrians or people on bicycles.
Absolutely.
The driver in the car, it's very easy not to be paying that much attention. And you just have to, people don't like people being on bicycles on the road and that sort of thing.
Yes.
But you got to be looking for what could go wrong. And if you have that attitude, then hopefully, you'll be able to avoid participating in something that causes an accident that none of us want to have happen.
Absolutely, because the injuries that you see in an auto versus pedestrian or auto versus bicyclist are just so much more severe than what you might see in a typical auto versus auto. So it's just so important to be aware, scanning the intersection and, checking those kinds of things and not allowing yourself to be distracted on the many things that can distract us these days.
I go to Mass every morning on the Catholic Church on Belcher Road, and I'm going first thing in the morning. I've had just a tiny bit of coffee. I make a left-hand turn on Belcher into the church parking lot, and there's so many people that will be jogging, and I'm just like, oh my God, I feel terrible if I didn't, see you just. And of course, when it's kind of dusk, or early morning, you don't necessarily have the best lighting.
Yeah.
But it's still our role as the driver to do whatever we can to kind of avoid any problems.
Exactly right. And so I know when Brian and I were talking about this last week, we were going over some of the various coverages, but we didn't quite touch on pedestrian accidents. I think it's a good idea to inform our listeners because some may not realize what rights or coverages may apply when they're not in their car.
Right.
So let's say walking down the street or riding their bicycle, whether or not they're still entitled to some of the coverages that you get when you're in a car. So the first one I want to talk about was PIP. So when you're a pedestrian or a bicyclist and you are injured while doing so, are you still entitled to first PIP coverage? And then my second would be coverage.
Yes. And so it is. And I think insurance is not something that the average person really knows that much about.
Exactly.
We're required, if we have a car, we're required to have the PIP, which we talk about PIP, and that's personal injury protection insurance. Yes. But no matter how many times we say it, it's, we work with it, but the average individual hopefully doesn't actually even have a need to use it.
You're absolutely right.
But so in a situation where there is an accident involving a pedestrian, the issue becomes for your auto insurance. If you have auto insurance or you are a resident relative of someone who has auto insurance, so you're an insured under their policy,
right,
then in that situation, you would be covered with the personal injury protection coverage if you were injured while you were a pedestrian. And that coverage can be very important. I mean, it's really 80% of your medical bills up to $10,000, also some lost wage coverage of 60% of your wages. So there are some coverages there that can be helpful to an individual, especially if they don't have health insurance. And even if they do, you don't have a deductible necessarily, as you might with your health insurance. You do have, there's different types of coverage that can go with the PIPs. A lot of times you'll have what's called medical payments, which would pay the other 20% of your bill. But if you do not, then you'd still have that coverage for the 80%. And so that's an important and valuable insurance coverage that would be available. And then in the event that you're involved in an accident as a pedestrian with another vehicle that either doesn't have insurance or does not have,
or leaves the scene.
Yes, which absolutely, sadly, would be things that do happen. Then in that scenario, again, if you have your own insurance that contains our most important insurance coverage that we always like to talk about, uninsured motorist coverage.
Yes. I think it will come up on every single show.
Because if people might have some appreciation, they have something for their medical bills or something, but no one has any appreciation for the uninsured motorist coverage unless they've been through an accident and unfortunately they were injured by somebody who did not have adequate insurance and they found out that there was no coverage available to assist them.
They learned the hard way, unfortunately.
Yeah. So that's our lesson 101 is the uninsured motorist coverage, which is intended to protect you in those situations where you're in an accident where there is not insurance coverage by the at-fault driver that can help compensate you for your injuries.
Exactly right. And so the PIP and the UM is almost, I forget the way Brian said it last week, but the way I've always said it is that it follows you where you go.
Right. It follows.
I think he said it sticks to you or something like that. Something like that. So whether you're walking down the street or you're in your car, those coverages, would still apply no matter what. And so they're good to have. Now, PIP is obviously automatic. You're required to carry that by law, but the UM is not. And so that's something that you want to make sure that you have and you're carrying. We always tell you, check your policy right now. Make sure you have it. If you don't, then call your agent and talk about adding that today, because you definitely don't want to have the vulnerability of driving around and something occur and you don't have it.
Yes, and the expense of it is usually not all that much compared to the value of it. Yeah, I mean, it's always something people have to decide. And a lot of times insurance agents they really aren't that interested in the coverage, so they don't really push it for people. But it is such an important coverage that it absolutely is something that should be obtained by every driver.
Yes, absolutely right. And so we could talk about auto so much more, and we do it all the time. But I wanted to actually pivot so that we have this topic for our listeners for tonight, because it came up in my mind randomly, just the way my mind works. The Olympic Games are now over. They've completed that in Paris. I believe all the games have now ended. The medals have been all awarded. But of course, I'm sure everybody was kind of tuned in here and there to the various games. And there's so many. I found out there's a breakdancing.
That one apparently turned out to be quite humorous.
And it was quite humorous. Never even knew that was a sport, but I just was looking at how amazing it is for these people who just put their body on the line.
Gosh. Yeah.
And they're constantly doing these repetitive movements like the shot put and the javelin, and they're throwing their arms and they're throwing their bodies, and the gymnasts are just, oh my God, they're amazing. Like Simone Biles is that's insane. But then that got me to thinking of all those repetitive movements and the damage that they can do over time. Obviously, they're very strong athletes and Olympians, and so they're healthier than the average person. But it made me start thinking about how that can happen to the everyday working person, where they're in an industry and they give their body to their job, doing different tasks that may seem mundane, but it's a part of what they do. And those tasks over time start to wear on their body. And I thought about it. I said, so that that brings us to the topic of repetitive motion injuries.
Mm-hmm.
And it's solely off topic from what we were talking about today, but I feel like we've never really discussed it on the show. And because of the Olympics, it just came up in my mind. I thought, oh, not just Olympians are putting their body on the line at work. And so are those kinds of repetitive, like I've just been doing the same thing over and over at my job, and now that part of my body hurts?
It's a very important thing that people tend to not appreciate in their own lives.
Mm-hmm.
So we look at the Olympians, and of course, here's Simone Biles, who I guess had an ankle injury, and they just somehow pushed right
Power
through
it.
Right,
you never
it's
know.
Utterly amazing. But in the work setting, most people, in their own way, just power right through it. And we've had many cases over the years, of course, where particularly with various assembly type work, where you're constantly using your hands and wrists in a particular, so it's very common to get a carpal tunnel syndrome. There's, you can be exposed to hearing issues, depending on like if you're working again in kind of an industrial setting. And the thing is, from the perspective of workers' compensation, if you do have an injury related to your work, then it is compensable under the workers' compensation system. But what becomes the challenge is that many times these things will go on for a very long time. And the person doesn't really make the connection, and so it sometimes becomes hard to prove that.
Exactly.
But it is something that if a person's in a job where they are experiencing a repetitive motion that over time does cause an injury, they really should raise it.
And that's what comes to mind. I think of like someone like a baker who they are using those piping bags and they're constantly kind of squeezing out. I did that actually in high school. I worked for Mrs. Fields.
Oh, Mrs. Fields. Oh my gosh, my favorite.
And that was one of the things that they trained you on is how to not get carpal tunnel when decorating those cakes, those cookie cakes. And I actually rather enjoyed it. I liked the decorating. Once I actually learned how to do it, I was pretty bad at first.
That's a great skill, Jacqueline.
But once I learned, it was fun. But that was so important. You had to do it in a way that could avoid injury, right? And so that's my question is when I've seen carriers say, well, there was no actual accident. You came to work, you were working, and you said your wrists were hurting, but what happened? You didn't drop anything. Nothing fell on you. You didn't slip and fall. There was no accident. So what happened? And then they'll deny it. It doesn't meet the statute, so.
And that's because the person, and it's a very delicate situation because here you are working. Most people want to keep their job, and in these areas where this is something that is actually a risk. Sounds like Mrs. Fields. I'm very pleased to know that they were very attentive.
They were,
and I appreciate that. Yeah, but many places aren't really, and they kind of don't want to see no evil, hear no evil. They really don't want to know about it. So the real issue is if you start to experience problems, you need to report it and be examined at the time. And then there's groundwork which kind of shows what has been happening. Now, we do have, it's very common not to, so I've certainly had many cases over the years where people, that is what's happening. And if you go to an orthopedist and your history is you've been working at a particular company forever, a very long time, it's, it can become pretty clear based on the mechanism of injury that is what's going on. But it's not uncommon for it to be fought. Because usually when this happens, it's actually happening to quite a lot of the employees in that particular industry because it's a problem.
And so I said all that to say that we're all Olympians at heart.
We are the champions.
We are the champions. And, if you find yourself in that situation where you feel you've sustained an injury because of the repetitive part of your duty, don't just assume, workers' comp denied me. I don't have a case. I can't pursue it. You should still give us a call because there may be a way for us to prove that it is compensable and we can fight that issue for you. So with that being said, we have reached the end of our show, folks. As you know, we'll be back next Tuesday at 5 o'clock. We'll have a special guest, a probate attorney who will be joining us to answer your questions. But that's it, Lori. Thank you for
Always fun.
coming with me tonight. And this has been FLA Law live on the radio. We will see you next Tuesday.